What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp free tutorial for you. So this week we're going to continue our series on getting started with the free online version of SketchUp. So last week we created a house using some smart modeling practices. This week I wanted to focus on some other things that can really make modeling in SketchUp easier. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so last week I introduced you to the concept of grouping geometry inside of SketchUp. And so the way that works is, if you remember, when you first draw shapes in SketchUp like this rectangle, and then you take faces and push them together, they merge. So if I was to take this square right here, move it against this face, and then move it away, you can see how this kind of auto folds that face in between them because they've stuck together. To avoid that, what we did is we came in here and we right clicked on one of these objects and made it a group, and then we took the other one and we made it a group as well. And so what that does is that makes it so you can push these objects together or pull them apart without the geometry merging. So that's kind of the basis for grouping things inside of SketchUp, is to keep these things organized and also to keep them from merging. However, there's an important function that I wasn't able to talk about last week just due to time, and that's the ability to use components in order to create repeating geometry that's easy to edit. And so basically the way that this works is, let's say I have a 2 foot by 2 foot square, and we pull it up 2 feet high. Well, let's say that for whatever reason we needed to make multiple copies of this square inside of our model. So we could take this and we could right click on it and we could group it. So we could take this and we could use the move tool in copy mode to create a number of different copies on this. And I'll talk about using the move tool in copy mode in a minute. But first I want to go ahead and work through this example with components. Well, the thing is, if you had multiple copies of this square inside of SketchUp like this, and let's say that you wanted to go back and edit one of them or edit all of them so that a change is incorporated across all of these, that could get really time consuming. So for example, if I wanted to take this one and make it 2 feet taller, I could come in here and I could use the push-pull tool to make this one taller, but the other ones wouldn't change along with it. Imagine if we had like multiple pieces of furniture, like copies of the same piece of furniture or copies of the same fixture or something like that, and we wanted to edit them with a different material or something like that. Well, that could get really time consuming trying to do that in our models. And so what we do instead is we create what's known as a component. And so what a component is a component is like a group inside of SketchUp, only now the group geometry is linked together. And so what happens is now every copy that we make could be an instance of a component. And so I'll show you what that means. So if we were to take this square, for example, and right click on it, you can see that there's an option in here for make component. Well, what that's going to do is that's going to take your group and that's going to allow you to name that, as well as adding a description, and there's some other options in here that we're not really going to get into in this video, but for now let's just say that we're going to make this a component. So I'm just going to rename this box. And you can see how in this space right here, the name of a component is called the definition. And so what that means is we're creating a component that's defined as having the name box. And so now if I click OK, and then I make a copy of this, well, now every copy of this box is an instance of that box component. And so what that means is now if I was to double click inside of this box to edit it, you can see how whenever I click on one of the faces, the other faces and the other corresponding objects highlight as well. And so what that means is now if I make a change to one of these, the changes are going to be reflected across the others as well because they're linked. They're all instances of this same component. And so this works for any kind of shape. So like for example, if I was to come in here and draw a cylinder and then pull that up to the same height, I could triple click on this, right click, and I could just make this a component. And we could just call this cylinder. And when we create our cylinder, we could do the same thing where we could make copies of it. And since they're all instances of the same cylinder component, they're all going to adjust at the same time. And so one of the things that's interesting about this is sometimes what you want to do is you want to make different components unique. So like once you've created these, for example, let's say that I wanted this box and this box to now be a separate component from these two. Well, what you can do is you can come in here and you can select these by right-clicking, and you could go down and you can click on the button for Make Unique. And so what that's going to do is that's going to take these components, these two that I had selected, and make them unique copies of the same component. So now, if I come in here and edit one of these, you can see how only the one that was made unique with it changes alongside it. And so you can see information about the components that you've created by clicking in the Entity Info pane when you have these selected. So you can see how when I click on these, the component definition is listed inside of this definition box. And so you can see how both of these, when I click on them, have the definition of box. And then the ones that I came in here and I named, or I made unique, you can see how they have that original name, but they got a number 1 placed behind them. So now this one and this one are instances of the box component. This one and this one are instances of the box number 1 component. And then these are all instances of the cylinder component. And so once you have an idea of the way this works, it gets really easy to create these copies or create these different components inside of your model and keep them kind of linked together. And so one of the questions I get a lot is when to use groups and when to use components, because a lot of the functionality is kind of the same except for the fact that they're linked together. And as a general rule, you should use components anytime there's a chance you're going to be making a copy of something. So if you're going to have more than one of it in your model, you should make it a component. On the other hand, if you're coming in here and you're modeling out like a floor plan and you have walls like this, and you've push-pulled them up and you want to put those in a group, you would put this in a group, not a component, because you don't really need this to have that smart functionality in here because you're not going to make multiple copies of your walls, at least in this situation. So in this case, a group would be fine. In this case, using components is a good idea. So components are going to be an important part of your workflow. Now I wanted to show you another trick that makes creating copies of objects inside of SketchUp a lot easier. So probably the first way that you tried making copies of objects was just to do a copy paste, right? So you could right click in here and you could click on the button for copy. And then you could right click again and you could click in here to paste. And that would allow you to place an object inside of your model. That's a perfectly valid way to make a copy. But what happens is it gets really hard to make sure that you're creating a copy in a straight line and that you can place this wherever you want it to be. It's just kind of cumbersome to create copies that way. And so usually what we do instead is we use the move tool inside of copy mode in order to create copies. And so the move tool can be found over here in the left hand side, and you can just click on this to activate the move tool. There's also a rotate tool in here, or you can just tap the M key. And so usually the way that I do this is I like to select the object that I want to move, and then I tap the M key to activate that move tool inside of SketchUp. And so what we're going to do with this is right now the way the move tool works when it's active is if you find a point, which is going to be your base point, and you click and then move your mouse, you can see how the object that you've selected moves along with your mouse. That's what we've told it to do. We've told it to move this object. Well, if you look down in the lower left-hand corner, there's an option in here that says Control equals toggle copy. And so what that means is if I move my mouse out here, with this tool active, I tap the Control key. What this is going to do is this is going to create a copy of this cylinder out here. So instead of moving the original, it's going to create a new copy. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can see how inside of the measurements bar, there's a value in there for a distance. Well, if you wanted to, you could move your mouse in a direction, and you could type in a distance, like let's say 10 feet. And hit the enter key, and this would move this 10 feet. This would move this 10 feet along whatever direction you moved your mouse when you hit the enter key. So that's an easy way to create a copy of an object that can be really kind of precise in its location. But the other thing that this tool can do that you're going to use a lot of is it can also create what's known as an array. And so an array is multiple different copies at once. So let's go ahead and let's activate the move tool in copy mode again. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select this cylinder, tap the M key, and then click on a base point. So I'm just going to click right here. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did before where I tap the control key to turn on copy mode. And so now let's say we wanted to make a copy 3 feet in this direction. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my mouse along the green axis, and I'm going to type in a value of 3 feet and hit the enter key. And so now you don't want to touch anything else inside of your model, so don't click off of this or anything like this. After you hit the enter key, if you type in times and then a number of copies, so in this case let's say we said 5, and hit the enter key, what that's going to do is that's going to create 5 copies in whatever direction you copied your original object. So these are all spaced at 3 feet. And notice that I haven't clicked off of this or turned off the tool, because what I can do is I can actually adjust the number of copies by typing that in again. So if I typed in times and 10 or x 10 and hit the enter key, that's going to create 10 copies. If I wanted less, I could type in times 3 and hit the enter key or something like that. So you can use this to quickly create arrays in a certain direction by making copies. And so one thing that can be super cool about this is not only can you do this in by multiplying based on a distance, you can also do this between 2 points. So the way that that works is you can just do the same thing we did before. So select an object, tap the M key, click on your base point, and tap the control key. So what that does is that puts us in copy mode, and that lets us move an object in this direction. And we'll go ahead and we'll say that this is going to be 30 feet. So we'll just type in 30 feet and hit the enter key. Well, now instead of typing in times, you're going to type in divided. So you're going to type in a slash and then a number of copies. So in this case, if I type in 5 and hit the enter key, that's going to create 5 evenly spaced copies between this point and this point. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And notice that I still haven't clicked off of this or anything like that, so I can adjust the number of copies I make between those points. So if I wanted more copies, I could do like a divided by 8 and hit the enter key, divided by 10. You can really make as many copies as you want. Or you could do divided by 2, divided by 3, and hit the enter key. And you can see how you can adjust that number of copies that you're making basically as many times as you want, as long as you don't click out of this tool. And you can, if you click and hold the center mouse button, you can orbit around while this is still active, and you can still type in different values. So you can see how I'm able to orbit while this is active without losing that tool. But as soon as I click off of it, then it doesn't work anymore. So now if I type in divided by 6, it doesn't do anything. So you're going to use the move tool in copy mode basically to create all of your copies inside of SketchUp. And so the last concept I wanted to talk about in this video is the concept of curves and the number of segments inside of curves. And so SketchUp, when you create a curve inside of SketchUp, they aren't true curves. And what that means is, let's go ahead and drop an arc in here. So I'm just going to tap the A key and then single click, single click, single click to create an arc. Well, if you zoom in on this, you're going to notice this isn't actually a smooth curve inside of SketchUp. What it is instead is it's a number of individual segments making up this curve. So you can see how as you move along this has something like 12 segments in it. Well, if you select a curve like this one and you go up into the entity info, you can see how the number of segments shows up inside of this arc. Well, let's say I was to come in here, select this, and type in a value of 24 and hit the enter key. You can see how what this curve does is this curve adjusts so that instead of having 12 segments in here, it now has 24 segments. And so the reason that this does this the way that it does this is it's actually a way to improve performance inside of your SketchUp models. So what that means is, let's say for example, we'll go ahead and take our 24-sided arc and we'll close it off, and we'll pull this up so we can look at the faces on it. We're going to do the same thing by creating an arc over here that has 12 sides. And note that when you first turn on the arc tool by tapping the A key, you can type in a number of sides that you want this to have. So if I wanted this to have like 10 sides, I could just type in 10 and hit enter. And so we're going to create a 10-sided arc here. And then we're also going to tap the A key and we're going to create a 4-sided arc. Whoops. We're also going to create a 4-sided arc over here. So you can see how this arc only has 4 sides on it. And we're going to draw a line across this. We're going to push-pull each one of these up. So I'm going to draw a line right here. I'm going to push-pull this up. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to go into our display function, which you can find by clicking on the little glasses. We're going to click on the button for hidden objects. And so that's going to allow us to look at the hidden geometry inside of these objects. And so if you look at this, each one of these is made up of a number of flat faces to make up our curved face. That's how SketchUp creates curved faces, is it hides the geometry between the curved faces and these, or between the flat faces that make up each one of these, and then this looks curved. Well, the more segments that you have in the arc that you initially create, the more faces get created when you push-pull things up like this and things like that. So like for example, if I was to select this would tell me I have 102 entities selected inside of this object. Well, this one, if I select it, I only have 46 entities because I had half the number of segments in here when I created this extruded face. And this one is going to have like 22 entities. And so the point of talking about this is for you to recognize that you could come in here with every one of these and make this 128 segments and make it look really smooth, but the problem is at a certain point you can't tell the difference anymore, and all that it is just more geometry that SketchUp has to render without you actually getting an increase in the way things look inside of SketchUp. So what we try to do is we try to minimize the number of segments in here so that we get something like this face, which has half the geometry of this face but still looks smooth. You can't really tell the difference when you zoom out. And so you can do the same thing with the circle tool. So if you tap the C key to activate the circle tool, you're going to notice that there's a number of different sides in here, and you can make the number of segments in the circle whatever you want. So like for example, I could type in a value of 6 and hit the enter key, and my circle is going to have 6 sides. If I activate this again by tapping the C key and I type in 12, my circle is going to have 12 sides. And just like the arc tool, as long as you don't explode these, so as long as you don't right click on this and click on the button for explode curve, you can actually come in here and adjust the number of segments in a circle. So like for example, I could come in here and I could adjust this to 24 segments or 48 segments or something like that to adjust how smooth this circle is. You can go down to I think 3 segments if you want to. So there's a lot of adjustment you can do. You can also use this to create these different geometric shapes. So if you want to create like a pentagon, for example, you would change the number of segments to 6. And so the last thing I want to talk about is the softened and smooth geometry inside of these faces. So right now, if I click on this face, you're going to notice that the whole thing selects, right? If I don't have my hidden geometry on, I select this whole face because all of these edges have been what's called softened, which means that they've been hidden, and SketchUp treats the 2 faces on either side of this as an individual face. Well, if you were to come in here in your view under display and you were to click on the button for hidden objects, you can see each one of these faces individually. You can also see the edges between these faces. Well, what you can do is, let's say for example that you wanted to split this object on either side of this edge. Well, what you could do is you could select this edge and you could come up here and you can see how in the entity info right now there's an option in here for soften off. So if you take this edge, you select it, and then you click on it like this, you can see how this edge is now no longer soft. And what that means is if I turn my hidden objects back off inside of display, this face is now split between these 2 different sides. And so this can get really important if you're trying to apply like different materials to this. So if you were to use the materials editor, you could now apply one material over here and one material over here by splitting that face up by softening that geometry. So, or unsoftening that geometry. So let's say I wanted to do it again, I could just go back and turn on my hidden objects. I could click on this edge, and then in the entity info, I could turn soften off, and then I would turn hidden objects off. Well, now this is split up into 3 faces, and I could apply a different color over here. So the other thing is this is also smooth, which is different than softened, meaning what SketchUp is doing is it's applying kind of an algorithm to this face to make it look smoother because the edges between these are softened. Well, if you select these and then you scroll down inside of your display options, there's an option in here to take all of the edges and you can unsmooth them really quickly. What you're going to notice is if you turn off smooth edges, so if I triple click in here to select all of this geometry and I select smooth edges and I select soften coplanar, you can see how this face is going to look really smooth along here. But if I was to triple click in here and I was to keep soften on but I was to leave smooth edges off, you can see how now you can see these individual faces a lot more clearly. So SketchUp isn't smoothing them out with its algorithm the way that it usually would. So you can use the function in here for smooth edges by triple clicking and turning that on along with soften coplanar to make curved faces look smoother. So that's where I'm going to end this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. Was this helpful to you? Did you know about some of this stuff? I just love having that conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Every little bit helps, even if it's only $1 a month. So make sure you check out that link in the notes down below. But in any case, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.